Now they knew themselves to be followers of the God of Abraham, and reconciling themselves with the beliefs that were held with the people around them. They had been a traveling people. They'd been a wandering people. They had been nomads. And the temptation amongst those nomads was to believe that the God of Abraham was all very well when you were wandering, but if you became an agriculturalist, if you became a farmer, then you had to take on the gods of the people around you, because surely they were good for growing things. They knew what they were talking about. So I think an intense struggle went on in the early Hebrews when they arrived in the Promised Land. And that struggle was, how do we reconcile our first exposure to people whose beliefs are profoundly different to ours and appear as healthy as us? And in fact, they have something we want because they are settled, they have agricultural life, they have cities, all the things that we have come here to have ourselves. And I do believe that they incorporated many of those tales themselves, but this didn't disturb them. They saw profundity, they saw wisdom. They saw grandeur in these stories. And they saw that these stories pointed to the same God that they followed. But it was a process. Because in the Old Testament, even the way that people describe God changes over a period of time. It starts off, we may call it pantheistic. God is described as better than all the other gods, the greatest of all gods. Later, in the Old Testament, God is the only God. They progress from being a people who believe in many gods, but only one who is supremely powerful, to a people who only believe in one God. There's a process going on here. Adam and Eve are not proper names. The danger of reading everything in translation is when you come across a word which looks peculiar, the translator says, oh, that must be their name. Adam just means mankind, humanity. Eve can mean many different things. In fact, Eve is by far the most interesting character here. Let me tell you a little about Eve and how we've delved into the background of Eve. It's from the Hebrew word hava, which is the Arabic hava, identical but different spelling. In the early languages, the Semitic languages of the area that the Hebrews found themselves, the word means living one or source of life. Now, she's described as Adam's wife, humanity's partner, in other words. And her name is derived from the words chava, meaning to breathe, and chaya, meaning to live. And her name only occurs 5 times in the Bible. Historically, the name appears to be derived from that of a Hurrian goddess called Cheva, who was shown by archaeological texts to have been worshipped in Jerusalem during the late Bronze Age, when the Hebrew people first arrived in Jerusalem. Now we see that there is a reaching out on the part of the Hebrews into the cultures around them to steal the meaning, to take what is profound, to take what points to God, and to draw it into their sphere of understanding. This is never a way of dismissing Scripture. This is a way of reaching into Scripture. This is not a way of saying, I dismiss this as a fairy tale. It is a way of elevating it to true myth. And true myth means a story which is true on levels more important than the surface facts. And Jesus told these as parables. They've been told as Aesop's fables. We have them in our own culture. We draw to movies because we see the inherent truth in them freely. We draw to fiction and to literature because we see ourselves in them. When something doesn't resonate with us, it's pointless. People don't join themselves to it. Now, get back to stewardship a little. I've gone through Genesis 1 and a little Genesis 2 for a reason. Because it is a literal interpretation of these two texts, which have led people to believe that everything in this world is just there for our consumption. That there is no true stewardship, just consumption. Now, the stories in Genesis 1 and 2 contain truth, but that truth is not held in the sorts of details that satisfy our intellectual curiosity. Rather, their truth abides in the nature of humanity and our relationship with God. And in the central truth that God did indeed create us, that God treats with us, that God communicates with us, that God is interested in us. We as Christians have to look beyond Genesis as a blueprint of what is prescribed, i.e. what is not allowed, or even what is normal, and see it as a sophisticated allegorical statement, one that is not all surface, but which takes work and prayer and actually the hard work of a life journey to fully appreciate it. It's in Jesus that we see that relationship perfected. And the stewardship of each other and of creation subtly changes, because Jesus is a lens through which we put everything that we knew previously. Jesus is a lens through which we put everything in our lives. And yet we've never got round to putting our relationship with creation itself through the lens of Jesus Christ. We've never got round to putting Genesis through the lens of Jesus Christ. And if we don't, we may well destroy ourselves before we get a chance to do so. No longer are we to be controllers, but carers, tending and nurturing rather than reaping, harvesting and slaughtering all we find or have managed to raise. If Adam was understood, well, that sounds better, doesn't it? No. That's better. If Adam was understood to be the survivor at all costs, with everything put there for his benefit, then in Jesus we do not survive at all costs. In the crucifixion, we can see the limits of those costs, and that is where our survival means death for others. Those are the limits. If our survival means death for others, then our survival is too expensive. Jesus could have used others' lives to sustain his own. He chose not. He gave his life for others. We use others' lives to sustain ours. We do it all the time. We use others' lives to put clothes on our back. We use others' lives to put gas in our cars. We use others' lives to keep our convenience. Not even to save our lives, but to keep our convenience. I do it myself. I hate myself for it sometimes. That's not good enough. I don't hate myself. I should be doing something about it. We use other lives. We use other parts of creation all the time, just as if they were provided for endless resource, as an endless orgy of consumption. And we think nothing about it. Jesus tells us something different. If others must die that we can live, the costs are too expensive. The costs are too much. Is God, and here's the question, this is a really difficult one. When I wrote it down, I thought about it for a long, long time, I applied it to myself, and I felt profoundly uncomfortable about it. If Adam was understood to be the survivor at all costs, then we must be something different. Creation is not just a stockpile, but part of God's loving actions. And it is as precious to God as we are. This can be summed up by saying that the beaten dog cries to heaven with indelible tears, just as do we at the touch of cruelty. That God hears the cries of the slaughtered animals as God hears our cries, because that is part of creation. God did not create creation for any reason other than as an act of love. An act of love which can be sullied, and an act of love which can be thrown back in the metaphorical faith of God. Do unto these the least of my children, as you do unto me, takes on new meaning when we think that societies are often best judged by how they treat their most vulnerable. Children, minority, the elderly, and animals. It goes deeper than this. Do we respect God and the works of God, or do we see God as merely an extension of our needs? Do we see creation lovingly and lavishly brought forth over many millions of years as there for us, in the same way as an infant views it